Welcome back, geeks, and thank you for watching all of my episodes up until now. It is your man, Ike. We are here to finish off my trilogy, if you will, of why Night of the Living Dead is the single most important zombie movie of our time. Actually, not of our time, of all time. So, in the first episode, we discussed the history of zombies. We discussed where zombies came from, the idea of the voodoo zombie, and how that eventually evolved into George Romero's vision of the flesh-eating zombie. And then we also discussed in the last episode how George Romero pioneered the modern zombie film, how his original movies would go on to create many remakes. And in addition to that, he would inspire many other creators to come out in droves, in my opinion, to make additional zombie films. How, in a way, that George Romero is probably the single most important director in the modern zombie film ideology. But in addition to that, how Night of the Living Dead, while it is an important movie, it also is an important landmark in time on when zombies became what we think they are now. And then in addition to that, Night of the Living Dead would then spawn multiple directors to then create zombie franchises of their own, which are also incredibly important outside of George Romero. And that's what we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about two directors specifically who actually had direct involvement with either Night of the Living Dead or other works of George Romero, who then went on to actually make their own franchises. So we're going to jump into that today. So as I mentioned, there are two specific directors who were either directly influenced in some way, shape, or form by George Romero, or they're actually involved with the initial inception of Night of the Living Dead. So first, we're going to start with the initial inception. So like we kind of talked about in the last one, just a little bit, Night of the Living Dead actually had two writers. It was George Romero and John Russo. Now, John Russo, specifically, had a completely different idea of how the zombie, how everything would go, essentially. He had his own ideology on where the project, where the film series should go next. That being said, John Russo and George Romero, after a dispute, actually decided that George Romero would make movies called, just Dead, of the Dead. And then John Russo would make movies called Living Dead. Specifically, he went on to make a film series called Return of the Living Dead. If you've never seen Return of the Living Dead, I would explain it to you as a zombie comedy, but not in the same way that Shaun of the Dead is a zombie comedy, but in a way that it is a campy 80s zombie comedy. It honestly, the first one was in 1985. In 1985, it was the era of, punk. The black leather jackets, the chains, the piercings, the spiky hair. That was what the film was about, in a way. It featured its stars as these punk characters who inadvertently get themselves into a situation where they're having to face off against these zombies. Now, specifically, the zombies were of the brain-eating variety. And this is important because, in my opinion, if I had to guess, and obviously there may be some literature out there that can maybe explain this a little better for anybody who's concerned. But in my opinion, I think one of the primary things that George Romero and John Russo kind of had with their takes on zombies was that George Romero definitely thought that zombies were mortal. They were able to be killed. They didn't have this invulnerability. They were indeed vulnerable. And in many of their films, the ideology of shoot them in the head. One of my favorite quotes from the series that's actually been repeated in other series is, I believe in Dawn of the Dead, the original, they talk about, severing the head or shooting them in the head, something to that degree, which is a fantastic quote that is actually pervaded into modern culture in a lot of ways. But back to John Russo. John Russo, I believe, thought that zombies were meant to be sort of an immortal being. In the Return of the Living Dead franchise, he specifically made point to include the fact that these zombies could not just be killed. You had to specifically burn these guys alive or electrocute them in some situations. And obviously the continuity is a little iffy depending on how you start the franchise and where you go with it. But in of itself, the movies themselves, they depict these zombies as, I would say, damn near immortal beings who are very hard to kill, which obviously makes it different. And they're also not necessarily the flesh-eating zombies. They're the brain-eating zombies. That's what they want. They want to eat your brains. So in my opinion, John Russo wanted these immortal brain-eating zombies, whereas George Romero was more interested in a more vulnerable, a more mortal version of these zombies that were easier to kill, but in these great numbers. In George Romero's vision, zombies were very difficult to kill. But enough about Romero for right now. So John Russo obviously would go on to make additional films in the series, such as Return of the Living Dead 2 in 1988, and then Return of the Living Dead 3 in 1993. Additionally, there were two other ones, Necropolis and Rape to the Grave, which actually, ironically, both came out in 2005, both straight to DVD. But specifically, these movies all kind of had a similar ideology, except for Necropolis. Necropolis actually departed from the ideology that they could be easily killed, because in Necropolis they were easily killable. So if you've never seen these, I'd recommend watching them. But definitely specifically in the Return of the Living Dead films, in the beginning, hard to kill zombies, flat out, damn near immortal. But they did kind of drop off on that, but then they eventually picked it back up and Rape to the Grave. So in 2005, they actually had two movies. One was more akin to a Romero-style zombie, whereas the Russo-style zombie kind of was more on the one side. So it's kind of half and half in the 2005. It's kind of odd to even talk about. But regardless, I would recommend watching most of them, at least the first three, just because the 2005 ones are all right, but they fall into the same issues that all sequels in the modern age have. They try and pump too much money, too much special effects into it, and they try and make it something that it's not. So keep that in mind if you want to watch the first three. To follow up on that, John Russo actually also made a direct sequel to Night of the Living Dead. Now, this is not to say that Return of the Living Dead isn't a direct sequel, but in a way it was a loose sequel. So a lot of these movies are loose sequels. Now, I would say that Dawn of the Dead is a direct sequel, because it actually embodies similar ideologies to what was happening, whereas Return of the Living Dead is a little different, but regardless of that, there is another loose sequel. I would say this is actually a direct sequel. Let me rephrase that. Return of the Living Dead was a loose sequel, whereas the other movie that I'm about to mention was a direct sequel. But before we get to that movie, in 1999, John Russo actually remade Night of the Living Dead. It was 99% the same footage, except for he went back and with modern technology filmed 15 new minutes of footage and spliced it into his film. Now, I'm not going to say that it was a bad movie, because it ultimately, for the majority of it, it is the same Night of the Living Dead that we have all seen. But for about 15 minutes of it, it's a little rough. The footage is not great quality. Now, obviously, I don't know if that was intentional, because they're trying to get it to similar quality as it was in 1968. Obviously, being 20 some odd years after the fact, it probably doesn't help. Actually, I'll take that back, 30 years to be specific. But regardless, it's a good movie, and the footage isn't, I guess, horrible, but it just doesn't fit. But the reason he did this was because of a movie called Children of the Living Dead that he made in 2001. Now, he actually doesn't like Children of the Living Dead. He's actually gone on record saying that he wasn't really proud of it, and that, not that he regretted being a part of it, but that to some degree he did. And honestly, I feel like that's how some creators are, especially with modern age films, especially when they make something so great like Night of the Living Dead and Return of the Living Dead. John Russo had an impressive, I would say, resume up to that point, and then he made a film that was just trying to cash in on, I feel like, something that didn't need to be cashed in on. But regardless of that, he did what he did. He created his own franchises. The direct sequel of Night of the Living Dead for him is Children of the Living Dead, and then a loose sequel is Return of the Living Dead, whereas Romero made the direct sequel being Dawn of the Dead, and then made additional direct sequels after that. So the last person I want to talk about that was directly impacted by these films that would go on to make his own film series was a man named Dario Argento. Hopefully I said that right. I looked it up and I believe that's correct. But Dario Argento is an Italian filmmaker who actually secured financing for Dawn of the Dead in exchange for international rights. So Dario Argento actually then took Dawn of the Dead, completely recut the movie. And when I say completely, the movie he made is actually shorter. It cuts out a lot of the character exposition, a lot of the scenes that honestly give the characters depth, and he creates more of an action thriller in a way. And it's by no means a bad cut. In fact, I would say that if you're more into an action movie, you would like Dario Argento's cut of Dawn of the Dead. It was actually named something different. It was called Zombie, and that is Z-O-M-B-I. And that was actually the international release, which actually projected Dawn of the Dead to the next tier in regards to popularity and status. It actually, I would say, accomplished more than Night of the Living Dead. But Night of the Living Dead, in of itself, spawned multiple different series, which then obviously spawned other movies, other remakes, and things of that nature. That being said, Dario Argento, his series would then live on. Now, he didn't have as much involvement after the first one, but the series of zombies would go on. For instance, Zombie 2 and Zombie 3 were both films about zombies, of course. Zombie 2 you may have seen, and the reason I say may is that you have probably seen a scene of a zombie fighting a shark, and that is from the Zombie 2 film from 1980. Now, it's not a bad movie, again, but it really has nothing to do with Dawn of the Dead, or Zombie 1, and it has more to do with just that filmmaker's ideology and what they wanted to see in a zombie movie. Zombie 3 was the same, didn't really have any ties or connections, and then there are also 2 additional zombie movies called Zombie 4 and 5. Now, I'm not really going to jump into those at all because they actually have nothing to do with zombies, and they have nothing to do with Dario Argento. But they are called Zombie 4 and 5 and are in some way, shape, or form loosely based on the originals. But I'm not going to get into that because, quite frankly, I've never seen them. I probably will never see them. So if any of you have actually seen those films, feel free to throw your opinions down in the comment section. I've heard nothing good about Zombie 4 and 5. In fact, I heard that they were actually renamed at some point. I'm not even 100% sure. But regardless, those are there, so feel free to check them out if you want. But what I was getting to essentially was that Dario Argento then projected the Romero movies to a next level of what I would consider popularity, stardom, success in a way, because he was able to expand it to an international market. So you're probably thinking now, Isaac, we've gone all over this, so what's the final verdict? So I'm going to keep my final statement here pretty short and sweet. In my opinion, the Night of the Living Dead movie, overall, has created so many franchises outside of the Dawn of the Dead, Day of the Dead franchise, outside of the Returning of the Living Dead, everything else, outside of the Dario Argento saga, outside of all those movies, he has inspired hundreds, thousands of creators to not just make movies, but make TV, to make comic books, all kinds of things that continue to purvey and to bleed into current modern popular culture. So that being said, I would argue that still the effects of Night of the Living Dead, outside of Night of the Living Dead being a solid movie that still stands the test of time, even, what, almost 50, 60, almost 60 years now? Outside of that, we are experiencing what I would consider a phenomenon, a point in time that had it not happened, we would not have the rapid success of what we would consider the modern zombie genre. George Romero and John Russo made sure that their legacy was cemented by making the Night of the Living Dead movie and then forever changing zombies into the modern age that we have. So in my opinion, Night of the Living Dead is the most important zombie movie of all time. And George Romero, I would also say, is probably the most important zombie movie director of all time. If you like this video and you want to see more, feel free to like and subscribe and comment down below. And let me know what else you want me to argue, what other points or opinions that I may have. I have plenty, don't worry. But for now, like, subscribe, follow, check us out on Facebook and on Twitter. And we will catch you next time. Stay safe, stay healthy, and see you.